She's an awesome instructor, and if you've taken any of her classes, know. And for this summer, she's doing a horticulture lab that's working on a little bit of restoration and a little bit of other stuff. And she's actually running the workshop tonight. And then pretty much the field trip tomorrow. So the focus tonight for you guys that are new to this thing and trying to figure out what's going on is ecological restoration. So we're going to have 3 or 4 people talk. Then we're going to have, we do have dinner, very simple tacos provided tonight. And then we're going to I'm going to give a lecture for our group on the principles of sustainable development. Dino is going to do some more stuff on policy in the evening, and we're going to watch that video, Butterflies and Bulldozers. Like I mentioned last time, it's about the Bay Area, and I forget the name of the little area where they first of all came up with a conservation plan, how to manage a lot of different issues going on at the same time. So that's kind of what's up, and I'll turn it on to Lyn. I'll be in and out because I'm getting all the paperwork ready tomorrow. There's been some problems with the buses and stuff, and so I'll be in and out a little bit while this is going on. So thank you very much, Lyn.
Thank you. Thank you, Neville. Okay, so
one more thing. Again, I want to welcome the Forest Service people that have come down, the interns from Forest Service. That's awesome because that way people know that there's actually people that are interested in doing this stuff, that are doing this stuff. And also the political science students, there's a number of them here, but they'll be coming a little bit later. So for the instructors and lecturers, don't worry, there'll be some people wandering in. That's the political science students that their class is online, but they're encouraged to come to these workshops as well. But they generally show up more like around 4 o'clock. So that's kind of what the instruction was. So we need to work on that, clarifying that a little bit. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so my name is Lyn Shirley. Like Neville was saying, my field of expertise, so to speak, I was a field biologist, but I've done a lot of restoration, specifically wetland restoration, and more so saltwater restoration. I have done some freshwater, but where I worked at Point Magoo, which is in Ventura County, it is the largest remaining wetland in Southern California. So I was very fortunate to do quite a bit of field work at that location. So my topic to you is ecological restoration. For you to understand that, there are some terms that we need to define. The first term being ecology. Okay, ecology is basically the study of how organisms interact not only with each other, but with the environment as well. Okay, so it's very broad and general. Ecology is kind of one of those topics where you learn a little bit about a lot of different things. You're not like a particular guru in any one area, so to speak, because in order to be an ecologist, you have to understand about that organism, you have to understand about the habitat, you have to understand about the climate, okay? Because really you don't understand that organism unless you look at the big picture. And that's what ecology is. You're looking at the big picture, how everything is able to live with one another, okay? So I suggest if you go further on in your educational career that you either download or you purchase a Greek and Latin root word book, because depending on the class you take, like if you take a class that's offered here in our department, Carlos's Plant ID class, you're having to learn all these different Latin words, and you're like, it's very intimidating. So if you start getting yourself familiar with all these words, the Greek and Latin, your vocabulary it'll come easier to you. Okay? Just like if you go into the medical field, same thing. So again, ecology is not just how organisms interact with one another, but it's also the environment. There's 2 terms that's used quite a bit in ecology. It's called biotic and abiotic. What's the prefix A mean?
Like dead.
What?
Is it dead?
No?
Or is it something bad?
Not.
Okay.
Okay? So bio, what's bio mean? No, bio, not bi. Bio.
Bye.
No, bio. B-I-O. Living. Living, life. Okay, biology, the study of life. Okay? So if you're a biologist, there's, say, I'm a doctor. Okay, that really doesn't tell me anything. I mean, are you a cardiologist or a pediatrician? Are you, there's all these different types of doctors. There's all these different fields of biology. Okay? So, biotic are the living components of the environment. Versus abiotic, not everything is living in an environment. Okay, such as buildings, such as vehicles. That is a part of our environment. However, it's not the living part. But still, you have to know those two components to see how they're interacting with one another. All right, so the other word that you need to understand is restoration. Okay, you look it up online on Merriam-Webster. It says the act or process of returning something to its original condition, either by repairing it, cleaning it, preserving it, okay? Whatever it takes to try to get it back to the way Mother Nature originally had it. That is the ultimate ideal goal, okay? Don't worry too much about the note taking. We can put this on Blackboard for you, okay? Because I don't want you like that. Because, it's been many years ago, but I used to be in your seat, and if you start writing too much, you're not really listening as much as you could. So I can download this. I'll give it to Neville, and he could put it on Blackboard for you. I like to say I could print it off, but both our printers are down today. So, yeah, hey, it's not me. Okay. Hey. So restoration is trying to get that particular habitat back into the good condition it once originally was in. So then you have ecological restoration. Basically, you're trying to either recreate, initiate, speed things up, recover the ecosystem that has been disturbed. How disturbed? Okay, ideally not that bad. Then there's other cases like Ken and Joe have dealt with that it's been severely disturbed, and they're trying to put it back as if nothing ever happened. Okay. And the thing is, with ecological restoration, you have to realize this isn't something that happens overnight, okay? It's not something that happens within 2 years. There's a lot of pre-planning that goes in ahead of time before you can even start the actual working of it. And then after you've implemented your work, there's still work to be done afterwards, and I'll talk about that as well. So basically what you're trying to do is correct those disturbances, right? And those disturbances can happen one of two ways. Either because of human intervention, but it's not always human intervention that is causing these disturbances. Mother Nature, okay? She throws some pretty hard ones at us. Her Katrina, we have these tsunamis, we have earthquakes. So we try to restore things after these events. Again, what you have to realize, it's gradual. When we're talking about restoration efforts, in order to make an ecosystem effective the way that it originally was, you could be talking easily 150 years before you get all those plants and animals that should be there. Okay? It all depends at what stage of it you're in. So we already talked about the biotic, the living factors, the non-living being the abiotic, and what causes the need for the restoration. So there's two types of what's called succession. Okay, these are ecological terms. Succession. Okay? You have what's called your primary succession, and then you have your secondary succession. Primary succession starts off with bare bottom. There isn't even soil. You're just starting with rock. And over time, you're starting to have that soil layer starting to accumulate. And as that soil layer starts to accumulate, then you can have your mosses, your lichens, okay? And then as more starts, then you can have your annuals, your grasses, your shrubs, your small trees, and ultimately your bigger trees, if you're talking about terrestrial. Then you have what's called secondary succession. Secondary succession, basically what happens is there was some sort of disaster that occurred and it wiped out that habitat, but it didn't wipe it out to ground zero, because you still, even though those plants for the most part have been destroyed, like a forest fire, what do you, even though there's a forest fire, what is still there for you to work with? Bill? Soil. You still have the soil, okay? Because without the soil, you're not going to be able to grow anything. We don't have our hydroponics or aquaponics out there, okay? So we're talking about out in nature. So the main difference between primary and secondary is, what do you have to start with? With the primary, okay, you don't have the soil to begin with. With the secondary, the habitat might have been, wiped out and you're starting over, but you're starting over at a different point. You're a few steps ahead, okay? Any questions on that? So this is you know what, need the lights out. Rebecca, can you hit the lights, because you'll see the picture better that way. Try just one bank of them if you would, please. If I'm not talking loud enough, or if I'm talking too loud, tell me, because I have this fan here, and I can't hear you really all that well, so I might be screaming at you, and I really don't know it. Okay? I'll wait till tomorrow, I'll get in your face to start screaming. All right. So, this is showing you primary succession. You're starting, again, with the rock, and you're leading all the way up to the biggest tree form. Secondary succession, you already have the rock, you already have those lichens and moss, so you're already 2 steps ahead. Okay, so that's showing that. This is just another depiction of it right here. Again, it all depends at what you're starting off with. If you already have the soil, you're automatically secondary succession. In order to have secondary succession, say that quickly, you had to have the primary. You had to have the first before the second. Okay? So, again, primary succession, there's no life that's already there. Okay? And so, therefore, it takes longer to get from point A to point B. You're still going to get to point B, whether it's primary or secondary, but the process for primary is going to take longer because you're starting with nothing. This is showing a forest fire with secondary succession. Secondary because, why? What do we already have here that primary did?
Soil.
We already have the soil. Okay? But look at how many years for this particular type of ecosystem, this oak and hickory forest. It's going to take over 150 years to get to that, what's called the climax community. The first plants that come in, okay, and start establishing that ecosystem, that habitat, that is called your pioneer plants. Those are the first ones that come in, inhabit the area, okay? So it's very indicative. When you are just walking around and you start seeing these particular plants, you know there was a major event that went on, okay, and you're having that succession going on, and you're within that first frame, okay? So you have your soil, you have your annual plants. What are your annuals? Not necessarily plants that bloom all year, but plants, Deanna, mine, annuals. Thank you, Mike. Okay, the word annual, 1 year, but really for an annual plant doesn't necessarily it doesn't mean they live for a year. They have one growing season. Okay, think about your vegetable garden. Do your vegetables, for most part, do they grow year round? No. Once that cold snap comes in, they're going to start dying off. So that's what happens with your annuals. You get your vegetative state first. Okay, the plant has to get established. And after the vegetative, then comes in the reproductive. It does everything within one season. Then you have what are called your biennials. So what happens with your biennials? Your first year is what? Vegetative. It has to grow. So it's given one whole growing season to do that, and the second growing season, what's going on?
It's
Yeah, the flowering, the vegetative part. Okay? Then you have your perennials. What's going on with the perennials?
oh, they're
Yeah, permanently there, okay? They have many growing seasons, more than 2 growing seasons. So they're coming back year after year, like a tree, okay? It's not like the tree grows 1 year or even a second year and dies off. It's gonna last many years. So then you have this other category called intermediate species. Okay, those are the middle ones. And then the ultimate final destination is what's called your climax community. Again, depending on the type of ecosystem you're talking about, it could take well over 150 years, and some it could be less. But we're not talking about within 2 to 3 years. It takes, 2 to 3 years, you're still in this phase right here. So this is very time consuming. It's gradual. It's not instantaneous. And with the way that we're functioning nowadays, that's a big downfall for us. We always want it now, now, now. Well, if you're going into restoration, that's not for you then. If you're one of those, I want it now, it's not going to happen. It takes time. So what they typically talk about when they talk about restoration or succession is terrestrial. But you can do aquatic as well. Okay? And what this is showing you, whether you look at the left one or the right one, is you have this aquatic ecosystem here where it's, a nice open body of water. There's a little bit of vegetation going on. There's quite a bit surrounding, but as far as in the pond, there's a little bit of aquatic life going on, whether it's plant or animal. Okay? Then as time goes on, this is my soil layer. I'm starting to have that sediment buildup, and I start having more aquatic life go on, whether it is the flora, okay, flora, big fancy word for the flower, okay, the plant life, or the fauna. What does that sound like? Baby fawn, an animal. So flora and fauna, plant and animals, okay? And then you eventually have it to where you have full sedimentation, full layer of soil at that point, okay? Okay, so here's a little video, hopefully it'll actually work. Is it turned up? Ah, get back. Oh my goodness, it's like everywhere. Oh, of course it's not gonna work. It'll work at home. Okay, whatever. It's not gonna do it. All right, well, I thought I'd show it to you, a little cartoon of it, but. All right, so after you go through this restoration, it's not like you go out and you do this restoration practice and you just walk away from it. Okay? You have to make sure that it's going to still work. You have all this paperwork, all these drawings, you have all these meetings of these different agencies and organizations, and what seems to work in theory might not necessarily work in practice, and that's usually, unfortunately, the second rather than the first. Okay? So you have to do what's called mitigation. If you want to destroy an area, you can't just go destroy and then walk away and, oh, I never did anything. You have to consult with those agencies. They might and they might not let you destroy that particular land, okay? And if they do, you're going to have to recreate some more. Or maybe there is some already created and you want to enhance it. But that's the whole mitigation process. Whether it's, natural resource such as your stream, wetland, endangered species, all these things can cause you to have to offset that impact that you just did. Okay? So when you, yeah, Steve.
I'm sorry, I got a question. So with that last picture of the lakes and stuff,
Yeah,
with the sediment buildup, that's just like a natural
that's a
occurrence,
natural process.
right? So that happens with every lake and whatever eventually, in other words, eventually it's gonna dry up or no?
If you didn't have plate tectonics, because with plate tectonics, you have that shifting of the plates, and that's what's causing the mountains to rise up. The lake bed could get lower as a result. So if you didn't have that shifting and moving around, yes, that's what would end up happening. And that's why, like in harbors, they have to dredge it out, because you have the soil, okay, that sediment coming down from the river system, which we actually want. There's pros and cons to having dams. I mean, with the dams, they're, flood control, they're using it to create, energy. That's all fine and dandy. But at the same time, it's damming up that sediment. So what's the big deal about that? How many of us go visiting the beach during the summer? Okay? Beaches are becoming more narrow. Why? Because that sediment isn't coming down the system, replenishing the sand on the beach. Okay? And so what they do have to do is when that sand does come down, it will start filling up the harbors and whatnot, depending on the layout. And what they do is they take that dredge material sometimes and they dump it on the beach. But they have to do testing, okay? Because there's a lot of toxins that come down with that. There's what's called coliform. The animals, it's not like they have a porta potty or anything. They go in the river and the streams and whatnot. So they have to test that dredge material before they just arbitrarily dump it on the beach. Or what they'll do is they'll have a dredge, like a pipeline, and it'll take it out like 3 to 5 miles out into the ocean. Okay? Good question. So with this mitigation, you have this debt and credit system. Your debt is you just did some sort of destruction. So now you're in debt. So you can get credit by, again, restoring, recreating. There's a lot of different ways of going about the mitigating of it. So what you're trying to do is either preserve it, improve it, completely recreate, okay? And so you're trying to enhance it back to the way it was. So you can do it a lot of different ways. There could be where you're just trying to start from scratch. It's like, I destroyed this particular type of habitat, and I'm going to recreate it 2 miles over here. Or maybe there is somewhat good quality habitat over here, and you want to enhance it. You'll get credit for that, but which do you think you'll get more credit for? The enhancing or the complete recreation? The complete recreation. Exactly. So after you're done mitigating, after you've done your restoration, and you have this mitigation going on, again, you just don't walk away from it. You got to make sure that this is actually going to work. Okay? It's not a straight 1-to-1 ratio. What I mean by that is, for every 1 acre of wetland I destroy, more often than not, I'm not going to just create 1 acre of it. Because over 95% of wetlands in California have been destroyed. Okay? The largest remaining wetlands is Point Mugu, you have San Francisco Bay, and you have Humboldt Bay. But there used to be a heck of a lot more. Okay, there's only 5% remaining. Well, where did that 95% go? Well, we decided to fill it in. Because wetlands, a lot of times it's stagnant water, and we like filling that in because then you did away with the mosquito habitat. That's what happened like back in the 50s with the chemical DDT. We put it into our water columns to get rid of the mosquitoes, but then it had all these adverse effects onto the wildlife, like the bald eagle and the brown pelican. So a lot of times when you especially are doing, thank you, Noble, when you're doing wetland restoration, because it's such critical habitat, there's such little of it remaining. If you destroy 1 acre, more often than not, you're looking at an automatic 3 acres you're going to have to do to get credit for it. And just because you try to do 3 acres, it's like, yeah, we went out and we did it and everything, but you have to do what's called monitoring. You saw that, succession. It can take up to 150 years to actually get that ecosystem stabilized, to get that climax community. So if you're only monitoring the first 1-2 years, you're really not knowing if it's going to succeed or not. So as far as monitoring, you're looking at, depending on type of habitat, a minimum, bare minimum of 3 years. Usually 10 years out. Again, it depends on the type of habitat. Okay? So The plus side to that is there's all these different phases. There's the planning stage, there's the implementation stage, and then there is the monitoring stage. So anytime you're mitigating, that means you have to monitor, and this all relates to there's money behind all that. Okay? There's a lot of hours outdoors. It's not necessarily the most glamorous thing. You're out walking around, but it can be very enjoyable. You never know what Mother Nature's going to throw at you. Okay? But especially, I would say within the last 15 to 20 years, there's been a big wave going on for restoration. You just can't, and as Joe will explain, you just can't go blow up a mountain for mining practices. Now they're having to do these restoration practices. You can't just go in a river or a creek and try to dam it up or even alter the way that it flows. Ken's going to talk about that. Okay? And if you're wanting to, after you got like a 500-page document all signed off, still there's all this planning that goes into it. You have the planning, you have the implementing, and then you have the monitoring of it. So there's a lot of money that goes behind all this, because it's not just, you know, a lot of times when people buy things, you look at the initial cost, you don't look at the overall cost. Yeah, initially it might cost a lot, but look at how long that's supposed to last you. And that's what you have to think about as far as restoration. Not only that initial cost, but you have to set money aside to allow for that monitoring. Because Fish and Wildlife Service, they are not going to sign off on this. Army Corps of Engineers, they will not sign off on this paperwork unless you have some sort of monitoring program implemented. It's just not going to happen. Okay? All right, so I think that was my last slide. Hopefully I gave you just a brief idea, you know, of ecology and restoration and succession. If you have any questions, let me look at it here. From 6:30 to 7, we're going to have a question and answer session. You know, it's like, as, you know, Ken's going to talk next. Like, oh yeah, I meant to ask Lynn that. You know, during that half-hour time, you can ask any of us any questions you want. And then that's when we're putting the interns on the spot. You know, you guys can share your experiences, and then also maybe the students. You know, why did you get? You know, why are you interested in it? What have you gotten from it? That sort of thing. So that's when you guys will come in for that half hour. Okay? All right, so next is going to be Ken Lair. He, let's see here. I'll just pull that out. We'll find your PowerPoint. Are they look the same to me, Ken? Are they?
There shouldn't be two on there.
Well, they're
Well,
I say, I don't know if I,
Did you make any?
I know where to find it.
changes?
No, wait a minute, hang on.
Oh, okay.
Thanks, I was meaning to.
And I didn't know how to show them.
If they want to watch.
Yeah.
Wow, look at that.
That's how we want.
That's great.
Now you need to stand up right for a minute or two, stretch the legs, wake up.
1 and 2 and 2 and 2. Oh, you're hardcore.
Take it now, take it now.
You can do it, we'll watch.
Classic.
Age, you know.
You're the one that's
That's for people our age that get bricks.
Yeah. We get it on the heat, warm everybody up, you know. This is too nice in here.
Okay.
No, sure it'd be fine.
So this little guy is thank you.
That's right.
So, did everybody hear about the water across the road there? So there's water in 60A.
Oh.
So, at breaks. So hopefully it was good. Can I get any of the speakers water? You can, yeah, good. Anyone else? I've got 2 hands. Okay. Okay. I'll get some more.
I
Okay.
may need it for the.
All right.
Yeah. All right. Thanks to Lynn for asking me to be a part of this. How many of you have worked with me before on the study that's out here close to the river on campus? Anybody in here? Okay, well, everybody's new to this, all right. I'm going to talk a little bit about at least what I interpret from my experiences to be, how scientific knowledge, scientific findings, in fact, can be used in an intuitive way, become kind of an art. And it's not art, I'm not trying to think of it in terms of artistic and being very talented in drawing pictures of things, but just interpreting things in your mind, reasoning through things, using the scientific basis from which to draw from, but also observing things in nature and see how do those relate, how do things interact. And after a period of time, pretty soon you begin to form some intuition about how plants, in this particular case, I'm not going to be dealing with animals to speak of, but restoration in terms of plants, how they respond to the environment in ways that maybe we haven't studied before. And I'm going into a little bit of my experiences, just things that I can pull out from things that I've worked with over the years in a lot of the Southwest, desert Southwest. I've worked and retired from a couple of different federal agencies, one with USDA and one with the Department of Interior, and now I'm doing a little bit of consulting work on my own. But it's all been concerned with restoration, revegetation of disturbed areas in desert southwestern river systems primarily. So we're going to be bringing forth some examples on that. Here's a quotation by a science fiction author, and also kind of a scientist back in his own day of sorts, Isaac Asimov. What I like is the latter part there, where he's talking about the scientist is imaginative as well as rational. Sometimes, as a scientist, you have to make a leap forward and use your intuition to say, I think this will work. If we apply these things and these things together in a uniform fashion, I don't have any scientific studies or data to support that, but just based on what I've learned over the years, I think it'll work. And I think that's very true. If you don't do that, as he has said here in this quotation, your science tends to suffer if you're not imaginative and innovative in what you're trying to do. Thank you, sir. Here's kind of my interpretation or my definition of the art of restoration. It's just intuitive knowledge that you gain through your own experience in the field, working with things over a period of time, and how plants respond to varying environments out there, to the techniques that maybe haven't been fully studied, haven't been applied before, but still you feel because of what you've learned, what you've observed in the field, this should work. That's part of the art of restoration. Down there at the bottom also, I think it derives from a knowledge of where to find scientific information. Sometimes that's just an art in itself. It's nowhere to go to in libraries. Now that we have the electronic media, go to databases online and things like that, where to find the right information that you need to support what you think will work or will not work. That's part of it too. And sometimes the big start of all is stretching a budget. Knowing how to get the money that you have at hand for a particular project, assigning priorities to parts of that project, and making that budget stretch to cover it. Sometimes that's almost as much an art as anything else. A lot of times what I found out in my career, spanning about, 30-some years, 35 years, a lot of knowledge is already out there from agronomic systems, from agriculture. You talk to farmers, you talk to ranchers, They know a lot about stuff. They've been out there on the land their whole lives. Their families have been there for generations. They've tried lots of things that they know just from a practical standpoint, they work for them. Well, a lot of what we do in revegetation, at least what I consider that I do in revegetation, is taking some of these agricultural or agronomic axioms and things that you kind of take for granted that works in the agricultural community, and you apply it to the natural systems. You apply it to natural environments, and you find out just a little bit of tweaking, a little bit of adaptation, and they really work. A lot of these old timers, farmers and ranchers, they've known this for a long time. We just take it and adapt it a little bit. We kind of covered this. Emphasis on the intuitive expansion and innovation of techniques. That's what I stress to a lot of people, and that's what I try to do, is to try to synthesize things, say, why wouldn't this work? I know this has worked, and I know this has worked. If you combine those, why wouldn't it lead to this? Sometimes that leads you down some false paths. Sometimes it leads you toward an innovative path, and you discover something new that really works. Here's one example here in California that we tried over in the San Joaquin Valley in Fresno County. It's called charcoal banding, and we use it for weed suppression. This is a practice or a technique that's been used by the turf grass industry up in the Pacific Northwest, Oregon, Washington, places like that, where they grow fescue and Kentucky bluegrass and turf grasses like that for seed. They've been doing this ever since the 70s, but it's never been applied to native species in a natural environment, trying to revegetate a disturbed area. What they do is when they're seeding their grasses, they'll go through and over each drill row. This is a drill, and it drills seed in each one of those 4 rows. Now, most drills are wider than that. They'll have dozens of rows out there, but this is for small plot work, this particular drill. And underneath each one of those rows that has seed in it, put charcoal, activated charcoal in a slurry. It's a water-based slurry. You spray that in about a little 2-inch wide band right over your drill row. That's why those black stripes are there. And then right over the top of that, on a broadcast basis, you spray a herbicide that controls the weeds in that field. And what that does, the activated charcoal is very well known as a remediation product. It detoxifies any kind of toxins. You can take activated charcoal inside your stomach if you have a toxin that you've swallowed. This is the same principle. Charcoal deactivates the herbicide in that little 2-inch strip to prevent it from getting down to the seed. It controls the weeds in between those strips, but it lets the seed germinate and come up through the charcoal. It does a very good job on these valley type of situations. Here's some of the results of that. All you see in the background, all this tall stuff back here, that's all mustard weeds, annual mustards, black mustard, London rocket, things like that. And they're just infest the San Joaquin Valley tremendously when you stop cultivating, you stop irrigating, things like that. Well, this is the technique. We did charcoal banding. We did different rates of herbicide. Some were too strong. We killed most everything, but once we adjusted our herbicide rates, you got the natives up. In this case, this is Grendelia camporum, what's called California gumweed or Great Valley gumweed. That came up just great under that type of a charcoal banding. Well, this is something that had never been applied until we chose to do it out here on a natural basis using native species. It had always just been kind of held to the turf grass industry. So this is one way where you say, why wouldn't this work for natives in restoring areas? Yeah.
So was that a pre-emergent that you put on?
You can do pre-emergent or post. We did, in this case, we went on with Roundup plus this one called Gold 2XL, which is very active on mustards and has a residual in the soil. And the principle that works behind this too is that not only deactivates the herbicide when it contacts that charcoal, but the herbicide that goes down beside those strips, by the time the natives have germinated underneath that charcoal, they start to send out the root systems laterally and deeper, the herbicide is dissipated and it's gone in the soil. But it controlled the weeds during the time that we needed it to control them.
So where does that stuff go?
Pardon?
You said dissipated?
Dissipated it.
I know what the word means, but where did it dissipate to? In
It's
the air?
usually,
Down the ground?
it degrades by several different measures. Sunlight can degrade some of it. Water, moisture in the soil degrades more of it. Hydrolysis, as they call that, or light degradation is photolysis. A lot of times it's microbes in the soil, the bacteria, that degrade the herbicides. I mean, I could talk all day long on herbicides. That's one of my
Pet peeves?
specialties. That's not a pet peeve, it's one of my specialties, and I love to talk to people to try to dispel what I term to be myths about herbicide use. Oh, they're the big evil toxin. Well, herbicides in general are not. They have specific purposes and have been engineered just to work on plants in a certain way. Anyway, enough on that, or I'm going to get going on my soapbox. All right, here's another example of something that we find in the field. I've worked in these southwestern desert riparian systems. You have a lot of an invasive shrub out here that's come in from overseas, was brought in the early 1800s. It's now covered a lot of the West, particularly on river systems, called salt cedar, or tamarisk is another common name for it. There's a lot of that. We have it up and down the Mojave here, although a lot of it has been controlled in recent years by the district, doing on a controlled program, the Resource Conservation District. But you go over to the Rio Grande, the lower Colorado system, sometimes you can have a floodplain that's a mile and a half wide. That's all that's there now, is salt cedar, and it runs that way for hundreds of miles. Well, a lot of times, one of the things to think about doing is let's burn it. That's a cheap way to do it. We don't have to use herbicides. We can burn it, then we'll kill it, and we'll reduce the biomass where we can get out there and revegetate and do something with it. Well, when you burn, these are the two outcomes right here when you burn. One, fire on salt cedar just makes it mad. Just really makes it mad, and it just takes off like crazy from resprouts. It's a vigorous resprouter after fire for physical injury. Also, you drop a lot of ash on the surface that works against you in terms of revegetation, and I'll get to that in just a minute. Here's another thing that we've seen. This is a curiosity that really no one has studied, but we observe it in the field quite a bit. Once a fire goes through on certain stands of salt cedar in these river systems, not every stand, but certain stands, the sprouts that start coming back, you can see the green areas here, the sprouts that start coming back, the leaves and the stem kind of coalesce together into a fan, what we call a cobra stem, like that. They're just multiple young stems that genetically, as they were coming back and resprouting after the fire, just grew together like that into a fan. We say, okay. Another observation that we made then, when we saw this happening in certain stands, is that these plants became very resistant to herbicide treatment. When you see this happening, well, it's not something, keep hitting the wrong button, hope I don't blind anybody out there. Nobody's really studied this phenomenon out here, but we observe it quite a bit. We can draw inferences from that. We've seen this and experienced it enough that when we see this happening in burned stands of salt cedar, we know that, boy, we maybe have lost an opportunity to treat it with herbicides after that. That's one of the things, that's part of the art of restoration, is observation. Just looking at things and trying to deduce what's happening. It can be based on your experience. We spray, nothing really happens. It's very consistently associated with this type of occurrence. So pretty soon you start building a case that, okay, we need to change our plan of attack when we see this happening.
So no one's really studied why they're regrowing back like that? No
Not
one's
really.
researched it?
Not really. You need to do it from a genetic standpoint, for one, to see what's going on. What in fire makes the plant alter itself genetically to start producing things like that? We call it a fire artifact. It's a result of a fire. It's an unusual occurrence, but it's not something that's physically related. It's something that's happening genetically with the plant as a response to the fire. Evidently, it's resistant to a lot of other things. It's becoming more tolerant, maybe to heat and to dryness, to the summer precipitation schedules that are maybe drought, in a stage of drought. We don't know. We just know that for sure when you see this, herbicides are not necessarily going to work as well as they used to. This is just part of that art of observing and deducing.
Thank you.
Here's another example real quickly. Long way from here, both in terms of miles as well as terrain and the way it looks. This is Hungry Horse Reservoir up in Montana, which is about halfway between Kalispell and Glacier National Park on the western side. Beautiful part of Montana, really nice. We had a project up there that I worked with the Bureau of Reclamation when I worked with them several years ago. in that lake and in the river systems coming out of that, the Flathead River system, they've got an endangered species of fish called the bull trout. Hungry Horse Reservoir is the largest reserve, or largest home range population of this endangered trout in the United States, basically in North America. But one of the things that they're short on in trying to preserve and increase the number of bull trout in this lake is habitat for the young ones coming down. They're just like lots of other trout. They migrate out of the streams. The spawning, they hatch up in the tributary streams above the lake. When they reach 2 to 3 years old, they come down into the lake, and that's where they spend the rest of their life, and they grow to great big. These bull trout can grow to be about 25, 30 pounds. They're like big lake trout. And, you know, never have caught one. I would like to, but you gotta, it's catch and release, so to speak. Catch and release. What they're missing, though, is when the juveniles come down, they like to spend a lot of their time in the shallows, because that's where they can find protection from the bigger fish, so they're not predated by the bigger fish. Well, because this reservoir is a Bureau reservoir, Bureau Reclamation Reservoir, it's used for multiple purposes. It's a drawdown, what we call a drawdown reservoir. They pull it down regularly every year for hydroelectric power generation, to supply fisheries on downstream for other types of salmon and so forth. A lot of different uses for irrigation. So they're pulling it, it fills back up. They pull it down, it fills back up. What that does is it leaves a shoreline like this that's fairly well blank. It doesn't have any shrub or vegetative cover that these young juvenile trout need to hide in when they first come out of the streams. We looked at that and said, well, why would that be? There's lots of native plant material up here just above the shoreline. There's cottonwoods, there's alders, there's all kinds of willows, dogwoods, you name it, that should take in here, but we reasoned that maybe it's because the fact that it is a drawdown reservoir, they can't reseed themselves. Now, some of those species aren't good for reseeding, but most of them will reseed themselves. And when they try to reseed into this area, when the water goes down, the seed can't survive, or the really young germinating seedlings can't survive very well. That's the end of it, and they stay in this drawdown condition too long. I said, will they survive if we put cuttings out there? If we plant poles and cuttings out there, maybe that's spanning the gap that's missing here. So that's what we did. Back in 2004, this is one implement among 2 or 3 that we used to put cuttings of cottonwoods, willows, alders, things like that. The implement here on the right is called a stinger. It's attached, it's this big rod right here, tempered steel rod that's attached to the bottom of the bucket. This backhoe, track hoe, actually pushes it down into the soil, back out about 4 feet deep, creates a hole 3 inches wide, about 4 feet deep. Put your cutting down in there, they tap it a little bit. Sure enough, that was bridging the gap. 3 years post-plant, we've got all the cover that they need out there. This is exactly what the little juvenile bull trout need to survive until they can get big enough to fend for themselves. And all we had to do is just reason through this a little bit, saying, okay, it's not recruiting itself from seed, all these native species, probably because the reservoir, the way it behaves, won't let it. If we plant them in there artificially like this, maybe that bridges that gap, and sure enough, that's what we found. So this is another part of the art, kind of going beyond just the science of the thing and getting some good results. Okay, let's move along here a little bit. Challenges. And these are some of the major challenges that I see in a lot of restoration, particularly in the desert Southwest, riparian systems as well as upland systems, is moisture capture and conservation. We know around here that we need to capture and conserve every drop of moisture that we get in this desert environment. Salinity remediation. A lot of times we're dealing with saline systems. Not always, but quite a few. We've got salinity, salts in the system that we need to deal with if we're going to try to get the disturbed area, whatever may be the cause of the disturbance, reclaimed or revegetated. Microbial augmentation. Lynn was talking about that. A lot of times when you've got an area that's been denuded for a long time, or it's had invasive species and weeds in as a solid stand for a long time, the beneficial microorganisms in the soil, particularly one called mycorrhizae, which are native fungal species that have a mutualistic association with the roots of most native plants, those are missing. Those have been depleted and we have to restore those. Of course, we deal with native species and plant community selection. adaptation of species to the environment that we're working with aridity, with heat, with salinity, the hydrology of it, and so forth. The terrain, slope and aspect, that's a strong factor to be considered in mining applications. Joe's familiar with. And then management, what's become to be more and more a thing to address, for sure, in any kind of revegetation work is management of invasive species. Both the primary species, such as salt cedar may tend to be, or secondary species of weeds that come in after you've controlled the first one. And you have secondary weeds that want to come in. We'll look at examples of those. Here's some practical examples that I want to talk about a little bit. We'll try to move through these pretty quickly. Soil. You need to have some knowledge and experience and some intuition toward the soils that you're working with. Be knowledgeable about that. Be knowledgeable about the climate and hydrology that you're working with, the moisture environment that you have. Working with the vegetation, both the biology of it and, as Lyn emphasized, the ecology of it. And then your restoration techniques. There's a lot of different techniques that are used. And you know, this could be a semester's course. We could talk about this for a semester on restoration techniques, you name it. We're going to try to get through it really quick here today. Soils. Just want to make you aware of things that are out there. You know, if those of you that are not familiar with these things, if I've made you aware that they're out there, that's one great thing that can come out of this session today. Nearly every county has a soil survey published like this. Most of them are online now. Most of them are digital and electronic form that you can go and access that way through the internet. And every county essentially has their soils mapped. There's very, very few. There's some federal land on national parks, BLM, things like that, that is still in the process, but nearly all private land has been mapped. Here's the electronic version. This is what you can go to on the internet and pull up areas, and they have a self-instructional tutorial there as part of this to show you how to work it. But you can, in this web soil survey, you know, you can pull up things, you describe the area of interest, what area of land, pinpoint it just like you do on GPS, that you want to work with. You can pull up a soil map, you can pull up soil data, information on the physical characteristics, the chemical characteristics, structural characteristics of the soils that you're working with, all on the internet right now. I would encourage you to take advantage of that. This is just one example of something that you can pull up and print out if you want to, or you can save. Just soil map units, you can go into detail, you can pull up tables on all those characteristics and properties that a particular soil has. It's all right there on the internet now. There's an application, in fact, for your smartphones, your iPhones, that is also like this soil web, where it's a combination of, you know, you use the GPS feature on your smartphone, wherever you're at, you go into that application and it'll pull up the soil right where you're standing. And it gives you all this information. It gives you the horizons, the depth, the bedrock, all the properties and everything. So it's very handy.
And that's on which website? I'm sorry.
Soil web for the phone. I'd have to give you that. It didn't have it up here, but I can show you that on my smartphone.
Oh,
I've got it with
awesome.
me right
Okay.
here. More on soil. Salinity. This is a typical salt cedar site. Salt cedar right there behind this fella. This is all the salt cedar leaf litter, leaf duff that covers the ground. One of the reasons why nothing tends to grow under salt cedar when you have a monotypic stand, a solid stand of salt cedar like this, is it covers the ground with this leaf litter that's full of salts. That's where it gets its name. Salt cedar has the ability to take salts out of the soil, put it up through its system, and then exude it back down onto the ground through its leaves, and it just makes the soil saltier and saltier over time, which helps to reduce germination of other plants around it. This is just mentioning this. You can get specific laboratory analyses of soils. You get a sample, you bring it into a soil lab. They can give you all kinds of things here on EC, which is the electrical conductivity, the pH, the alkalinity or acidity of the soil, major elements like calcium, magnesium, sodium, chlorine, things like that, and so forth. These are really available. Lots of soil labs around the state where you can get right on the site-specific features of your soil that you're working with, and that's very important. You need to know that in revegetation. Particularly, know, you can imagine the difference between working in an environment like this, the soils, versus coming down to the foothills, this zone right here, and now the picture down below would be desert, that type of thing. This is a shot that's taken just south of here, looking toward the San Bernardinos. Using salt cedar areas is just one example of salinity impacts. This is one that from the Rio Grande that most people will look at this and say it's hopeless. This is a stand that's been like this, untouched by fire or anything else for about 60, 70 years when this picture was taken. You know, it just looks like there's nothing under there, and there isn't. But salt cedar, it's got all this litter on the ground and so forth. And yet what we found is there's a process that goes on that actually the electrical conductivity, which is a measure of salt, is just around 2 to 6 with an average of 4 underneath all this. Well, we wouldn't have known that if we just hadn't suspected that, okay, well, we find something different in this versus a young stand that's been burned about every 10 or 12 years. Well, as it turns out, that young stand is the most productive on salts. A young stand above ground that's been burned every so often returns a lot more salt to the ground than these old stands do. These older ones, they have 100% canopy closure. Underneath, they're shaded. They're almost tropical, semi-tropical underneath, cooler, reduced evaporation, reduced rise of those salts due to evaporative demand. They don't put as much salt back to the surface. So what we see is we're on a cycle here that this is time and this is salinity in the soil. As that stand matures, it increases in salt, over time increases, but once it gets to a certain point of maturity, everything's covered with a canopy, everything gets cool underneath, there's not as much evaporative demand, it brings salts up, it comes back down this side. You actually have a low salinity environment to work with under this mess that looks terrible from above. Again, that's just kind of an intuitive thing that you need to find out. Here's another thing too. You burn this stuff, as I mentioned, not only do you get regrowth, but you release a lot of that ash to the surface. The ash has salts in it, so basically you're just dumping a load of salt right on the surface with the ash when you burn a plant like salt cedar. Here's one of the things, the ash layer. We measured the electrical conductivity, in other words, the salt load in that ash itself, and it measured out at an average of about 166. This is just the units for electrical conductivity. Went all the way up as high in certain places as 237. Well, what does that mean in terms of revegetation when you have a high electrical conductivity like that? Well, in terms of species that you might want to put back in there in that riparian system to replace salt cedar like cottonwood and willows, they have a tolerance of about 4. Electrical conductivity of 4 to do well, to get them going and get them established. Well, as you can see, they're not going to make it in stuff like this. So again, that presents challenges. So there's ways of dealing with the ash that hopefully we'll have a chance to get to here in a minute. Climate and hydrology. This is the Rio Grande. This is that example that I was telling you about. This is the whole floodplain of the Rio Grande. In fact, it goes clear across here out of the picture. This is all salt cedar, 100%. Nothing underneath it. And not only no other plants, but no pill bugs, no coyotes, no nothing. It's just salt cedar. It's a biological desert of one species when it comes in like that. There's things available on the internet as well as in libraries and in the literature on climate and hydrologic sources of data. This is one, the Western Regional Climate Center. And you can find all kinds of historic as well as current climate on precipitation, on temperature, on snow, you name it, readily available at a site like this. There's another one. This is the one in California called CEMAS. These are weather stations that are put out more in agricultural areas where they have cropland, but they still combine with this site over here to give you pretty much on the spot, multiple site per county weather data that you would need to know. When did your precipitation arrive? When does it come? How long does it stay? How frequent does it come through? How many inches of precipitation you usually get in a particular area? This is where you can go to find this out. Real quickly, this is a site just right out beside us here. This is the Mojave River. We're down here in this blue circle. That's where the college is at. We've got a study right here just immediately east of the college on campus, just immediately south of the solar array, right down in through there. This one is up here in what they call the Narrows. You can see the Narrows right there where the river goes through on Highway 18 that leads to Apple Valley. There's another educational institution there called Lewis Center. So not very far, just this far apart, and yet you see some significant differences in precipitation, even just that close together. Apple Valley versus Victorville. Here in Victorville, the chief thing to look at is during that November to March growing season. That's when most of the precipitation comes in this area, this desert environment, what we call a summer, or excuse me, winter monsoonal period. You got about 4.2 inches. Not a whole lot in the growing season, but for here, that's pretty typical. We just go right down the stream to Apple Valley, that other location, you change, you lose about a half an inch. You think, boy, just 2 or 3 miles, 4 miles, you wouldn't think you would lose that much. But you do. You can lose half an inch. When you're only working with 4.5 to start with, losing a half an inch can make somewhat of a difference. There's monitoring wells. There's monitoring wells that the Mojave Water Agency puts out, also USGS all up and down the river. This is just one example of a monitoring well that tells you how deep the water table is, where the groundwater is at in a particular area along the river. Why is this important? Well, you look at this. Most of the time, the groundwater right here stays at about 15 feet below the surface. That's what that below GS, below ground surface, that's what that stands for. Well, and in terms of interpretation, again, coming back to our species that we might want to put out there, such as cottonwood and willow, they typically do not like it if the groundwater is deeper than 8 feet. If they have to struggle for it, if they have to go down deeper than 8 feet, they usually won't last. Usually they won't establish very well. So this is wherever this site particularly is right here, may not be an area that you want to try cottonwoods and willows, because those are species that are called phreatophytic. They have to have their tap root system down in the capillary fringe of that groundwater in order to make it. If they don't, they struggle. All right, we'll look through this real quick. Do you see another difference here? Here's the college. Up here is the Narrows and Lewis Center. Here's the river going through here. What do you see that's different right there?
Green.
Green, exactly. Those of you that have seen the river, you know what this looks like. The river and the flow of water pretty well is underground. It just disappears right through here. This is kind of Bear Valley Road right in through here at the bottom. Disappears, disappears. Pretty soon it starts coming to the surface until it gets to here, approaching the Narrows. You've got lots of vegetation, lots of cottonwoods and willows and so forth in through there. That's because the geologic structure underneath forces the water more toward the surface. When you get in here, you have water table depths that are probably 4 to 6 feet below the surface. Fairly shallow. Sometimes they can come within 1 or 2 feet of the surface. Whereas down in here, they're going to be 15, 20, 25 feet below. That's some things you take into account as to where you pick your revegetation sites, where you want to get cottonwood and willow established versus dryland species, shrubs, things like that. All right, let's talk a little bit about vegetation. Again, there's lots of information, there's lots of literature out there on the internet as well as in library sources and databases on revegetation of desert systems, any system that you might be working with. There's lots of information, lots of literature out there. So feel free to avail yourself of it, and I can help you with any of those searches. I've worked with it for most of a career, and I know where to look in a lot of places. Here's a particular one that is very useful. This is run by USDA. It's called the Plants Database. And you can go in there, and they have information on almost any plant, both native and non-native, in the North America. You pick a plant, and you go to a little table there on this website. It's called Plant Characteristics. In this case, it's Cytoscramma, and you can pull up all kinds of information on that plant. There's another one, again, within USDA by Natural Resources Conservation Service. It's called the eVeg Guide. They will help you with formulating the seed mixture to use in a particular area based on characteristics of the soil, of the climate, of the elevation that you're at, growing zones, things like that. they can help you put together mixtures of species that should work for revegetation in the zone. So things like this are available out there. Again, our familiar slide, you've got variation, quite a bit of variation. You need to know what's the difference between working in a zone like this versus a foothill zone versus a desert zone. You can come up with suites or palettes of species. Here we've divided up, these are grasses. These are what we call forbs, or another term for wildflowers, herbaceous native wildflowers. And then shrubs. Shrubs are trees down in here. Adapted to your particular site, adapted to the hydrology, the amount of precipitation you get, adapted to the salinity in the soil, things like that, depth to water table. It's a very intriguing science, and I've spent my whole career at it, but I always find new things, and it's fun to come up with innovative ways to be intuitive about it. Part of that art, part of the intuition, is to know when you need to separate different types of growth forms. When you're revegetating, where do they go with containerized transplants like this, where you're actually transplanting nursery stock that are in containers versus seeding. You're going out and you're hand seeding, or you're mechanically seeding areas with a drill, something like that, or just hand broadcast like this, or where you need to go with cuttings, like we did up at that site in Montana. You use cuttings because seeding wouldn't have worked. We realized that early on. The underground system, the microbial system. This is the mycorrhizal species, the fungal species that I was referring to. They're in association, a mutualistic association with most roots, most native plants' root systems. They need to be there if they've been depleted in some way. And you can restore those microbial elements, the mycorrhizal fungi in particular, at the same time that you're putting into vegetation, seeding or transplanting or whatever it might be. These are species, typical species found the world over. These three species in this genus Glomus probably comprise 95% of the mycorrhizal species associated with native plants worldwide. Very unique that it's just confined to these three species. They help the plant capture moisture, help the plant capture certain elements like phosphorus and so forth, and also nitrogen in the form of ammonium, and also help the plant with salt tolerance. So this is important. In an area, a disturbed area that for whatever reason has lost its microbial community, you need to restore it at the same time that you do the vegetation on the surface. Invasive species, and then we'll close with this. This is becoming more and more important, not just because they're there, but because they definitely will provide competition with any natives that you want to restore out to a site in revegetation. It's becoming much more of a science in and of itself as we control invasive species management, but also there's an art to that as well. This is a species called perennial pepperweed that once you go in and you control the salt cedar out there up and down the river, this is typically, we're finding, one of the first things to come back in is it's herbaceous. It's not woody, it's a herbaceous plant, and it'll just fill in right behind the salt cedar if you don't go out there and put something native in there to compete with it and fill the void that was just created by getting rid of the salt cedar. You need to do that. If you just leave it sit, don't do anything with it after you've controlled the salt cedar, this is the first thing it wants to come in. So you have to be available and plan ahead to know that you have to deal with this too. This is the salt cedar that I've been talking about. We have basically two species in the Mojave area. This parviflora is the majority of it. It has these familiar pink blossoms that you may have seen on it in the river. These usually bloom earlier in the year. Then you have another species called ramosissima, same shape, but it generally flowers much later in the year and it's greener earlier in the year. These are the shrubs that I was talking about that we're controlling in the river. Here's an example from much farther east in southeastern Colorado and on into Kansas on the Arkansas River. Again, we have our old familiar friend salt cedar. That's what these are. Same species as salt cedar. But under here, this is a solid stand of a weed called Russian knapweed. Just takes in and obliterates everything if you don't try to get in there and get natives established to compete with it after you've taken the salt cedar out. You need to be concerned about this in California. We don't have it out here on the Mojave system, but the San Joaquin Valley does. And it's growing. the Russian knapweed populations like moisture that comes out of seepage areas, out of canals, and ditches, and things like that, and other moisture collection areas and swales. We're starting to get more and more populations of this, and this is one, it's a vigorous perennial that you really need to be on top of it. Not very many people are aware of it. There's another one that's local. Phragmites, this common reed that we see out in rivers. We see it often in association with cattails in wet areas, wetlands, as well as riversides and things like that. Well, there's a native one that's been around all along, usually maintains its place along the edges of rivers pretty well. This is the Phragmites australis subspecies americanus. Well, now there's a European one that's come in. It's been introduced to North America, starting from the eastern seaboard, working its way this way. It looks like this. Not only is it larger, but it's much more aggressive. So if you're in a wetland situation or a river system, and you've noticed, maybe you're on a boat, you're on a kayaks, canoes, whatever it might be, and you're going up and down, and you notice for years that, yeah, there's this little stands, linear stands of the regular Phragmites or common reed along the river. You come back another trip, and all of a sudden, it's expanded tremendously. It's way out into the river. Its growth rate is really taken off. And probably what you have is either this European variety, European species, or a hybrid between these two. We've got that right out here on the Mojave River. A lot of people from UC Santa Barbara, other people that do studies up and down, this has come in on the Mojave River. A good place to find it is from Highway 18 at the Narrows, follow the river on down going toward Helendale. There's a lot of this hybrid and invasive stuff in there now. So again, this is something to be aware of as part of your revegetation. That's a shot of the Mojave River when water actually runs through it. That's subject to this invasive Phragmites. All right, we're going to stop at that, I think. I could get into techniques, but that would take us a long time to cover a lot of different things. I want to move along to the last slide really quick. If there ever is a take-home thing for this, it's that. It's not just art and it's not just science, but you gotta have patience. It's like Lyn was saying. Anything in restoration does not happen quickly unless you're lucky. If you happen to be in an area that for a particular year you get really good precipitation, you might be very fortunate. Things will grow that first year, really look nice. But most of the time, you're not that lucky. Most of the time, it's a 2-year or a 3-year or a 5-year process to get up what you planted or you seeded out there. A lot of entities, a lot of organizations, a lot of funding entities that provide grants for research and things like that, they still don't have a really strong grasp of this science and this art. Is they'll provide funding for research and they'll provide a grant, but they want you to get results and know everything you need to know in about 2 years. Then the money runs out. A lot of times it's not possible. You have to have patience. You have to have studies and deal with things on a 3-year, 5-year, even 10-year basis. It's patience, it's art, and it's science, all three. And so hopefully I can answer more of your questions during that question and answer period. And if you have any, I'll be glad to. Next one.
Okay, next we're going to have Joe Sifke. He is a retired U.S. borax geologist. So he's going to speak with you about his experience in the mining industry, what it was like when before a lot of this legislation got implemented, because it wasn't like the Endangered Species Act, I'm so sorry, Clean Water Act, things of that nature didn't even take place till the 70s, and then people started being held accountable for their actions essentially. So he saw the mining industry before legislation was implemented, and then he saw how it changed the mining industry, so he's going to discuss that. So take it away, Joe.
Okay. I don't have a PowerPoint or any fancy pictures to show you. However, you've got a handout, okay?
And so you can see my bullet items, and we're just going to touch briefly on each of these and a few other things. As it says at the top, I'm a retired borax geologist. I chose geology because I love the outdoors, like I'm sure most biologists and archaeologists and people of that stripe are familiar with. The outdoors to me was important. It's an escape from the office. It's nice to have a combination of rewarding office work, but also get in the field and get your hands dirty. And that to me was a very important part of my career. I've been retired for 10 years. Next month it will be 10 years. So I spend my time now taking care of my wife's social calendar and playing golf and a number of other hobbies I got going. But actually, next month I'll be out at US Borax, out at the mine, at a meeting involving some revegetation design. And that's one thing about it. When you become the on-site expert, they call upon you to sit in on meetings and put in your 2 cents. And so I was very fortunate. My first job was 50 years ago next month, and that was sitting a water well for the city of Sierra Madre down in the valley. And after that, a tour of work in Nevada, staking 120 20-acre claims up to the White Pine Mining District. The following season, I spent 3 months in the Yukon Territory working with 9 Canadian students from the University of British Columbia on a gold exploration project. And then after graduation, the following year, I wound up working for Getty Oil in Sonora, Mexico, and I enjoyed that until the U.S. Army called, and that was still the time of the draft. And spent my year in Vietnam, came back, got married, and I was shocked because I had no idea, but I hired on with U.S. Borax out at Boron. And I didn't know that was going to be my career-long job. I spent 35 years with Borax, and got me to far-flung places also. I spent, in terms of doing revegetation, getting involved in doing reclamation, I had 1 month on the Puna out of Salta, Argentina, looking for identifying species that could be used for doing reclamation on some borate mine sites there in the Andes. And that was a most rewarding experience. Again, lots of outdoor and just, enjoying different environments. Okay, mining and reclamation. Okay. Mining is very important here on the Mojave Desert, has been for more than 100 years. As a matter of fact, Borax is just entering their 88th year out at Boron. We'll talk more about that later. But mining started in California in the gold rush, the 1850s, and then the 1860s it moved east on into Nevada to the silver boom camps, and even Calico out here. I think there were more than 80 million ounces of silver mined at Calico. Most people don't realize what a boom community that was back 100 years ago or more, starting in the 1880s. Well, almost all of the early mining, the Hart District way out in the eastern Mojave, all of this was all underground mining, okay? And so there was a certain amount of surface disturbance, but not the kind of disturbance that came about beginning about the 1940s, around the Second World War time. The important thing was that the state began to recognize that because there were no laws in place, there was nobody holding miners' feet to the fire in terms of cleaning up after themselves, that there was a lot of land disturbance out there. And the Mojave Desert was no exception. So a law was passed in 1975 called SMERA, which you might want to write this down, the Surface Mine and Reclamation Act. Surface Mine and Reclamation Act. Surface mine, okay, because most mining that after the Second World War that was being conducted, you may be familiar with some of the limestone operations out here in Lucerne Valley and around the Victor Valley. Very important, very valuable businesses, okay? Almost all open pit mining, okay? Lots of land being deeply disturbed, okay? Reclamation. The reason the SMERA is Surface Mine and Reclamation Act, and not Restoration Act, is because I think at least there was some common sense involved there that restoration being the high end of the hierarchy. In Australia, they just use the term rehabilitation. But the law that was given in California was the Reclamation Act. And reclamation means to put it back as best you can. In other words, there are some very, very important elements involved in the act. But as Lyn said, that restoration is a return to the original condition. It's almost like before and after pictures being pretty close to the same thing. That's not going to happen in mining, in open pit mining. So anyway, SMERA has a number of elements, and I'll just look at these requirements with you. First of all mining is temporary, okay? Mining is going to come to an end someday, even if you're a 100-year operation. It's like borax is out there. It's going to be at least 120 years. But that's still temporary, okay? So, what does the Act require? First of all, designate a second use. What does that mean? That means you can't start turning earth in a new operation or continue doing an existing operation in the absence of identifying a second use for that property. Because mining is temporary, what does that mean? It means what is going to be sustainable on that property after the miners leave, okay? All right. The first thing that it requires, besides designating a second use, and out of borax, it's typical of most mines, open space, wildlife habitat. In other words, return it to the state, at least in general, of what it was prior to the mining operation. Wildlife habitat. Well, how do you create wildlife habitat? You have to put back the things that are friendly, okay, to the wildlife. If you're going to put the indigenous animals, the critters back, that means you have to recreate vegetation which they're familiar with, and that in the environment in which they can not only survive but thrive. Okay. The first thing you have to do if you're a miner is you have to prepare a reclamation plan application to the state lead agency, which is county government. Usually it's a county planning department, okay? All right. Next, you need to conduct site surveys to address environmental impacts. Actually, I brought a copy right here, if anybody that might be interested, of a surface mine reclamation plan application. There's a lot of information in this thing, okay? And you're free to peruse this for the rest of the day. Later on, you might be interested in just taking a look at what's in that document. But that is a 10-year-old, but still current, reclamation plan for U.S. borax, which is the largest mine in the state of California, and probably one of the richest in North America. Okay. Conduct surveys to address environmental impacts. What are those? Biology, hydrology, geology, archaeology, community impacts, people, okay? There are so many things that have to be addressed in the plan. These are just several of them. Now, finally, mine life and the final build-out design. Well, wait a minute. We haven't started mining yet. But you mean to tell me that I have to submit a plan that is the complete build-out plan of that deposit, how it's going to be mined? Yes, that's required. And what it means is that you have to conduct a detailed drilling program on a grid of some kind, drill holes from the surface down, access the deposit that you're going to develop. You have to determine the size of the deposit, the depth to the top of and the base of. You have to quantify it in terms of tons and grade. How much overburden? In other words, if it's buried like it is out at Borax, 300 to 700 feet below the surface, how much rock has to be removed and safely removed from atop that deposit in order to mine it and process it, okay? So there's a lot of details. It means that the geologist has to go in like I was involved in drilling hundreds of holes out there. You have to drill, quantify the resource, okay? And then after you've gathered all that data from in drill holes, what you do is you model it, okay? Computer modeling, very complex computer models. And then what happens? Then mine engineers take over. And what they do is they slice it and dice it, and they come up with a mine plan to systematically, year by year, remove that ore, okay, on paper. Okay, that's all part and parcel to the plan that has to be submitted to the SMERA lead agency, which in the case of Borax is Kern County, okay? All right, a lot has to go on before you can even file an application. Now, okay, let's get into some important issues. Financial assurances with cost calculations, okay? When you propose a project and you're going to do some really extensive development, you have to put that back to meet the demands of the second use you have designated for that property, okay? And what that means is that if it costs, like in the case of Borax, $150 million to do the reclamation, okay, where's that money going to come from? A proponent for a project of that scale, or any scale for that matter, must secure bonds or letters of credit that will guarantee that that work is going to get done. If they just close their doors next week, okay? So all this disturbance has already been done, all right? In the meantime, in the background, there are letters of credit, bonds, which are accrued. I don't know if you're familiar with accounting terms like accruals, but those monies are guaranteed there so that if a contractor had to come in and deal with the disturbance, conduct the reclamation, it will get done. And the taxpayers aren't going to be left holding the bit, standing there with the bill, okay? Okay, does the build-out plan support the second use proposal? That's the most important thing. The build-out plan must show that the second use, in fact, will be achieved, even though it's just open space and wildlife habitat. A lot of things have to happen operationally to secure that second use final outcome. What kind of resources are there on site? Soils, seed, is there equipment, is there labor? Are there power sources? Is there transportation access? A very important issue that the county will always stresses when they come out is every year, a county inspector comes out and takes a look at the site to see that if if the development is within the design boundaries, in other words, what is permitted. All of this falls under permitting. Does the plan provide for erosion control? You see, once the miners are gone, and after you've created this hole in the ground that's 4 square miles, and it's 1,000 feet deep, and there's thousands of acres of overburden piles with serious slopes, you're going to have erosion issues, okay? It's very important that erosion control, and boy, that's, when it comes to a lead agency concerned about mining operations, that's right up top on their list of concerns. Is there a concurrent reclamation and monitoring schedule? Concurrent reclamation, what does that mean? What miners have loved to do in the past was make promises that they're going to clean up a site and say, well, we'll do that after the mining is done, or we'll do that only at the late stage of the operation. In other words, put off expending money until the very late stages of the operation. But what has happened? What has happened is that something falls in a crack, the economy changes, the product that's coming out of that mining operation is no longer economically viable, so they close the door. And guess what? What happens? All of a sudden, everything stops. The equipment gets parked up. The labor force leaves to go to other jobs. Okay, so you got all this silent equipment. The equipment that was really meant to be used to do the reclamation. In other words, to do the soil capping over all that disturbance in order to prepare for revegetation. Okay? It's too late. That's why concurrent reclamation. The county comes out, their annual inspection, they go around and they have a look at what you are doing right now to reclaim. How many acres have you brought to final? And if you've brought it to final, that means that a lot of things start happening. You have to finish the surfaces. You have to do your revegetation. You have to do monitoring. And you have to hire outsiders to do that. It means that strip transects have to be put across your final surfaces, and the promises that you made on the kind of plant response you're going to get on those areas have to, over time, meet the promises that you made. Soil stockpiling. See, there's an issue because out at Borax, they're going to move nearly 3 billion tons of overburden to fully develop the ore body. They're about 25 years away from accomplishing that. And the biggest stripping still lies ahead. They've moved more than 1.5 billion tons of overburden rock today. Okay. The problem that they have out there is there's serious boron contamination from the fallout of historic operations. And as a result, not only that, but subsurface, there's a lot of boron contamination out in the overburden. So it's important that the final soils that are going to be used for cap material on disturbed surfaces, those be of a quality that is going to support the proposed plant life. Locally collected seed, that is extremely important, and there's great competition, especially in wildfire and forest fire seasons. The government pretty much gets control of the seed supply, so it's important to have control of seed from outside sources. But also, it is important if you have a large property that involves a mining operation, that you take advantage of whatever locally collected, seed can be locally collected. We did that out at Borax in spades. Again, public safety is a very important thing to SMERA. what is the final, once the mining operation is gone and the site is put in a condition that's appropriate, what kind of safety is going to be guaranteed when there's nobody there to guard or keep the public from doing stupid things? Berms, fencing, what have you. The idea is to allow access for wildlife to get on the overburden piles and into the open pit mine after the revegetation is completed, but that the site needs to be secured and safe from people falling off of high walls and things like that that are typical in mining operations.
And what are those steps?
Okay, a very important element here too is revegetation baselines. When the original surveys on the site in undisturbed areas that are going to be taken into the mining operation, both as an open pit or overburden, okay, waste piles, the baseline surveys must be done. As a matter of fact, out at Borax, they have conducted more than 500 strip transects to do their baselines, to determine, first of all, what is the complete suite of plant species, both annuals and perennials, that exist on the site in the undisturbed outer areas. Okay, those inventories must be taken in addition to animal surveys. Something that people don't like to do on a project is to make proposals as to performance criteria. Once baseline is established, the miners are enjoined to establish a certain performance criteria, and what that means is, okay, you've got an inventory of plants. Which of those plants is seed available, and for which of those plants are viable on the site? How do you determine that? The way you determine that is you put in test plots. And this is something that all mines have done in recent years. You put in 10 meter by 10 meter test plots and monitor those year by year to determine which of the plants on your site, which of the species are going to be successful in actually on your site. You know, you can read stuff in books about which species should be adapted to your part of the Mojave Desert, but there's no guarantees. It's important to have site-specific test plots to make a determination of what works and what doesn't work. Okay, the Borax mine case. Borax, in its 88 years, has produced more than 60% of the world's borates. Now that white mineral out there is it's like a gold mine. That operation, I don't know, how many of you have ever visited out at Borax? Anybody? You've had an opportunity. They have a fabulous visitor center out there and views from 200 feet above the desert floor down onto the open pit mine and the operations. If you ever get a chance going out Highway 58 heading for Mojave Tehachapi, stop in there. They're open seven days a week. Again, I said that the overburden they'll strip is 3 billion tons of waste rock to recover about 180 million tons of borates. And I'll give you a statistic. All 35 years that I worked there, at least for the first 25, I was privy to some financial information. In fact, it was in their annual reports. They're owned by Rio Tinto, based in London. But while I worked there, they never failed to earn less than, as net profit, less than $1 million per day.
Wow.
So that gives you an idea of the importance of that deposit, that it's a world-class deposit, and extremely valuable on a per ton basis. Borates go into the manufacture of glass, fiberglass, fertilizers, herbicides. They go into all types of products, 175 different products in small quantities. It has low thermal expansion. It's used in auto headlamps. It's got endless minute uses. It's an extremely important thing, probably one of the most pervasive elements in small quantities in the crust of the earth. Okay, so 50 years at borax predated Smera. Okay, so you got 50 years of mining going on. That's 30 years in underground, 1925 to 1955, and then open pit, 20 years of doing a lot of disturbance out there. Okay, the site at the time of Smera was more than a square mile in the mine, the open pit mine. It was about 600 feet in depth. It's gotten much deeper now, much larger in surface expression. There were more than 3,000 acres of disturbance at the time. But borax, Rio Tinto did the right thing. Rio Tinto decided that instead of, like a lot of miners were doing, they're saying, okay, wait a minute, our operations predate Smera. Why should we be held accountable for the disturbance that's already been done? But Rio Tinto said, no, we're not going to go for grandfathering of anything. We're going to accept whatever the state and the law requires that we conduct our business in both an efficient and a responsible way. Okay. So anyway, no grandfathering, and so the detailed field surveys and seed collection went on undisturbed portions of the site, out and away from the disturbance, and it's on that basis that all of the permitting was conducted. One thing that was found at borax is that historic operations involved the fallout of borate dust from operations for more than 30 years. There were no bag houses, there were no scrubbers, nothing to control dust for many years. So what happened was all the surface areas around the plant and the greater plant vicinity were contaminated with boron. In order to determine what kind of soils could be used for final reclamation work, it was incumbent on the company to set up an internal laboratory to run soils for boron. So what we did was to take samples, cutting samples from the blast hole drill holes, and run those through an on-site laboratory, run them for boron and SAR, sodium adsorption ratio. And SAR basically is a ratio of sodium to combined calcium and magnesium. It was important to keep the SARs below about a factor of 10, an SAR of 10, somewhere in the vicinity, trying to average our reclamation soils at an SAR of 5 and keep the boron levels down below 7 or 8 parts per million. We identified horizons in the deposit above the ore body in which we found soils that met that spec. So in the course of mining and doing the stripping from day to day, soils that were found to meet the criteria for reestablishing creosote and saltbush, which were important for the final slopes, set those soils aside. So the miners literally were hauling truckloads, 250-ton truckloads, to stockpile into areas where they could be beneficially used for final revegetation. Up till about 7 or 8 years ago, Victor Valley College students were out on the site doing transplanting of creosote plants and white bursage that were grown right here in Neville's nursery. And we had a collaborative going on for a number of years there, which was really a blessing both for the Borax Company and I know for the college. It got some students out doing some hands-on work, and that was very important to all involved. Creosote, everybody recognizes creosote. All mining operations out there, you've got slopes, okay? Anything that's sloped in the desert is occupied by creosote bush scrub. And this was the important part of the outplanting done by students here and also by contractors, is to reestablish creosote. That is the one species that they are wrestling with out there to get reestablished. In fact, up to about a year ago, I was down on my hands and knees doing some transplanting myself, using some late model techniques. Thank you very much. Again, if you want to see one of these monstrosities, I'm going to leave it up here.
Right, next we're going to have Megan from the Forestry Service. She's going to talk about the restoration efforts that the Forestry Service has done and is currently doing. Maybe you could announce, like, I know you sent me the flyer that the volunteer days.
I was gonna announce about tomorrow. I didn't get a chance to put them out today because all our printers are broken in our office.
Something in the air.
I guess, yeah.
Oh, in fact, they do.
I don't mind her.
Yeah. So you're gonna see Megan again tomorrow on our excursion trip? Yep. There you go.
So I've been with the San Bernardino National Forest for 4 years. My first year I was an intern. I kind of got into ecological restoration by accident. I saw a flyer right after I graduated with my bachelor's saying, apply for internships now. I wasn't doing anything over the summer, so I applied. Turns out that I really like it. It's kind of awesome. So then I decided to go to grad school. That was another random choice I made, and I've been researching restoration ecology for the past 3 years as well. So in addition to working in ecological restoration, the implementation aspect, I also do the sciencey aspect in restoration ecology as well. So it's pretty sweet. We're going to be talking about a bunch of stuff today. Hopefully we can get through it all. I don't know. We might be able to, we might not be able to. We're going to talk about the program, some of the vegetation types on the forest. We have a lot of them. A little bit about wildfire, not a whole lot, but if you want to know more, I love fire ecology. You can ask me questions. Some of the main methods we use on our forest to do restoration. Recently finished, in quotation, restoration projects. Finished in quotations because they're never really done. Current restoration projects, and then the monitoring program that we developed over the past couple of years. So the San Bernardino National Forest is about 700,000 acres, which is fairly small compared to other forests in this region as well as the rest of the United States. We have 3 districts. We have the front country, which is kind of like the foothills of the San Bernardino Forest. We have the mountaintop district over here, and then we have San Jacinto way over disconnected from us. This program is pretty unique to this forest. We have the only greenhouse, or the second greenhouse in California. The other greenhouse is in Placerville where they grow trees. So that's pretty cool. It began in the 1990s when a bunch of botanists decided they wanted to do some restoration in an old mine area. I don't have any data from that because the files are like gone. They're just missing. We also have this partnership with the Southern California Mountains Foundation. They're a nonprofit that works with us. And SoCal Mountains Foundation Restoration Program and the Forest Restoration Program are pretty much married. We work in the same office, we do everything together. We also have children's forests, we youth volunteers, which is pretty cool. Getting a bunch of young kids out in the forest to plant things and collect seed. We also have volunteer programs, which we're going to talk a little bit more about tomorrow, and you guys are going to get a handout, and I hope you all come restore the forest with us. And then we also do internships through Cal State San Bernardino, Victor Valley College, San Bernardino Valley College, Chaffey, Fullerton, all sorts of places. So that's pretty cool. We have some interns here today. Woo! I went through one of these internship programs, so I'm kind of partial to it. So the partnership with the SoCal Mountains Foundation began in 1997 when it was established. And then in 2006, they established a seed collection program where we collect tons of native seed. And we collect a lot. You guys, are they going up to the compound tomorrow? To our nursery and everything? So you guys will get to see a lot of our seed. We have like this walk-in fridge that has hundreds and hundreds of pounds of seed. We started a lot of large-scale restoration projects in 2009. In 2012, the whole forest was reorganized and people got shifted around, so now there's a whole bunch of new people in the positions, so that's been interesting. And in 2013 is when the San Bernardino Forest Restoration Program and the SoCal Mountains Foundation program got married, pretty much, because Forest Service staff was very limited. I was the only seasonal on staff that year, and I kind of had to do everything. This year we have 4 of us, so that's exciting. I don't have to do everything. And we also have these crews, the UCC, the Conservation Corps crews. They help us a lot. They're our manpower out in the forest because for restoration, women cannot do everything. As much as we'd like to think we can, we really can't. So a little bit on why restore. This is a map showing all the biodiversity hotspots in the world. And if you can see here, we are the California Forestry Province. We have a lot of plants here and animals. We have a lot of everything, mostly due to the Mediterranean type climate. So we want to try and conserve and restore those areas so we don't reduce global biodiversity. We also have extreme off-highway vehicle issues on our forest. We happen to be super close to the LA Basin, San Bernardino Basin, the whole high desert. Everybody flocks to our forest because it's awesome. There's good places to go. It's diverse. We have all these trails for jeeps and motorcycles as well as equestrians and hiking and everything. So we have problems like this. This happens to be some jeepers going crazy somewhere on the forest. And it causes a lot of erosion as well, which is another reason why we want to restore. We also have a lot of, oh, it got cut off. Oh, man. We have a lot of threatened and endangered species on our forest. San Bernardino National Forest is considered a sky island. If any of you guys know anything about island ecology, it's pretty cool. We have a lot of unique species that only occur on our forest and nowhere else, with plants and animals. So we have 71 threatened or endangered wildlife species. That's a lot. And we have 85 species of sensitive or endangered plants. And you guys will hear a little bit about that tomorrow from Scott Eliason talking about the permanent species. Unless he's busy, then I'll be talking about it. So that should be exciting. So a little bit about the program in Big Bear. We have 3 different areas that I'm going to talk about here. So the Big Bear Ranger Station is at 6,800 feet. You guys will get to see that tomorrow. We have a greenhouse, shade house, siege storage, bare root beds, and tool sheds, which you'll all get to see tomorrow, which is pretty cool. All of our funding is through grants, donations, and emergency funds. So my position is not funded by federal tax dollars at all. It's all funded through California tax dollars, through grants from California. That's how we get all of our money. And we also have these monthly volunteer work days out of Big Bear between March and November, which hopefully you guys will come to after I give you the paperwork so you can know where to go. So this is what the greenhouse looks like. I'm going to go through these pretty fast because you'll see it tomorrow. This was taken right after the greenhouse was put in. So if you remember this picture for tomorrow, you can see how much it's actually changed. There's like plants growing all over the place. This is our shade house where we store all of our plants during the summer because it gets to be 120 degrees in the greenhouse and stuff will die. We don't want things to die because it takes a long time to grow them. We also have a kind of a program at Lytle Creek where we have a shade house, seed storage facility, tool shed, and we use that station and that nursery when ours is snowed in or we can't handle it or whatever. So that has some interesting problems as well, but I can talk about those tomorrow. This is also funded through grants, donations, and emergency funds, and we also have volunteer days there as well. This is what it looks like. This is at Leto Creek Grader Station. Here's like the backside of San Gabriel's. These are beds where we can grow grasses and all sorts of different things. We can bulk seed up. This is what it looks like when stuff is alive there. We have a lot of water problems and stuff often dies there, which is too bad. We also have Children's Forest, which is what I was talking about with the youth volunteers. These are children from 11 to 18. It's a pretty neat program. It's pretty unique. There's not very many children's forest programs in the Forest Service system at all. And this is at the Deer Lake Ranger Station, so this is on the Mountaintop District, kind of near Running Springs, if you guys are familiar with where that is. We have the greenhouse shed, or tool shed and seed storage as well. And this is also funded through grants and donations, Edison, Forest Service money, and Disney. Disney puts a lot of funding into this program because it's for kids, so it's pretty neat. We actually got to take some like head honchos of Disney from Orlando on a tour of the forest, and they'd never seen pine cones before. They're like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. They were so excited. And then we also do a lot of environmental education for children there. There's an interpretive center with animals that live there. We have interns that work out of there that are very knowledgeable about restoration and the environment and everything. So this is from 2006. I couldn't find any recent photos. I don't know why. They're there, I just don't know where. And this was at Cactus Flat, where we're gonna be tomorrow. This is kind of what their setup looks like. This is their tool shed, and there's a seed storage thing in there. This is their greenhouse. It's really small. You can only fit like 3 people in there because there's tables on each side. It's really cute, but I guess it's good for kids since it's so small. So as I said, we have lots of vegetation types. These are only 6. We have a bunch more. We have this like juniper pinyon woodlands here, montane conifer forest, chaparral. These 2 are like desert scrub, and this is just a view from one of our fire lookouts at just the landscape. We also have things like pebble plains, carbonate habitat, which Scott Eliason will talk about tomorrow, riparian areas, all sorts of different things, high elevation, montane forest. It's pretty cool. We also have a lot of wildfire, which I like because fire is pretty cool. These pictures are from the old fire, and I think this is the Butler fire. And that's kind of important to keep in mind in terms of restoration. So we collect a lot of seed, not just for our restoration projects, but we collect a lot of seed in case there is a fire so we can get paid to go out and reseed it, rather than relying on other entities to supply us with seed. We can have local seed that's genetically viable for our area, and we know it's gonna survive. This is kind of what a post-fire landscape looks like. It's kind of a moonscape. I'll show some pictures here right now. Some stuff will naturally recover. We have some re-sprouts right here, and some other re-sprouts. A lot of the seed will live in the seed bank, or a lot of the species will re-sprout after fire because their roots are still alive. We also do assisted recovery after fire, meaning we plant trees, and that's where the greenhouse the greenhouse in Placerville comes into play, because they grow all the trees that we would plant on the forest after the wildfire. And sometimes we don't need to really do anything after wildfire because it naturally recovers. However, if it's really catastrophic, really hot, nukes the soil per se, we need to do some sort of assisted recovery, or else it's just going to erode away, and then we'll get lawsuits because we're eroding into the Santa Ana or something like that. So we're going to talk about some tried and true methods for our program. We do a lot of seeding, planting, slashing, and mechanical work. Those are the main things. There's some other little things that we do on the side, but we always end up coming back to these. So seed collection. We like to preserve our genetic integrity. We don't want to buy seed that was grown somewhere else and use it at 6,800 feet because it's likely not going to grow. So we collect tons of seed. We were just out seed collecting yesterday, and it was great. We collected a whole bunch. We like to stay within a mile of where we're going to be putting the seed back, and within a 500-foot elevation difference. Because once we get out of that 1 mile or 500-foot elevation difference, there's possibilities that there is genetic differences between that population and another population. So we try to do that. Some seeds we can expand this if it's a wind dispersed seed or something. Some seeds, if it's not wind dispersed or animal dispersed, it just like falls right there and grows right there. We don't want to. We sometimes don't even want that much variation because it could be genetically different. These are interns. Do you remember me taking your picture yesterday? No. This actually is one of our conservation corps right here. This is a youth conservation corps. They're between the ages of 15 and 18, and we use them a lot on the weekends because they can't work during the weekdays and they can't work long days because they're children. But we use them a lot as well to do work. So this is our seed collection protocol a little bit. I'm going to talk about it. I talked about how we want to stay local. All of these areas and these orange polygons, these are all specific for certain sites. So we don't want to collect, this is Cactus Flat something. This is Cactus Flat 1, which you guys will go through today. We don't want to collect seed there and then distribute it over here in like Holcomb Valley, whatever number that is. It's genetically different. It's a totally different vegetation type. We don't want to move that. So we use these maps out in the field to figure out not only where we are, but what section we're in and where we're going to be putting that seed back. So we also fill out these forms, which there's a lot of information we put on them because we want to know where we collected it, what species are associated with it, what vegetation type it is. Even though some of us may know it, somebody 10 years from now when I'm not here is going to go back in the seed record and be like, what is this Joshua tree? Where did you collect this? We need this information for when Forest Service staff leaves for better opportunities, pretty much. And we thought, it's true. So there's been a lot of people that have gone through the restoration program that are elsewhere in the States or within the region of California. And some of them have come back and then go back away, but we still find forms that they used, and that comes in handy for us when we're going out to seed or propagate or something like that. We also have these seed collection and propagation priorities. If you remember that NRCS slide of the USDA plants, these are acronyms for all of our plants. We don't like to write the full species name. It takes forever. So we refer to everything with their the first two letters of their genus and their first two letters of the specific epithet of the plant species. So we refer to things as like ERFA for Ariadne fasciculata. One, it takes forever to write it, and two, it takes a long time to say. And all of these areas, you can see they're all boxed off. These are all different project areas, and these are what we want to collect and what we want to grow for that specific restoration project. So this is some of our seed storage. We have a mini fridge. This is where we store all of our seed that we're going to be using in the greenhouse to propagate. It's usually smaller collections rather than our big collections of like 200 pounds of seed. We don't want to store that in this little fridge. It's not going to fit. We also have dry storage that's in that same shed, and we have to protect it from rodents or else they'll just eat all the seed, because that happens a lot. And actually, we did a seed inventory this past year of all the collections that we had present. Not everything that's ever been collected, but everything we had on site. We had something like 900 something individual collections of different seed. Yeah. I wish I had the map to show you, but I couldn't find it, which is too bad because I made it and I'm really upset about that. So after we collect our seed and we store it, we want to propagate it. So we put it into these seed flats and just start watering it. So we get all these little germinates coming up, and then we transplant them into these bullet pots and so on. And we also do cuttings of riparian species like roses or willows or cottonwoods if we're working in that kind of area. Those seem to work pretty well. We also do bare root beds. I don't think we really do this anymore, but they did it before my time. And we also do native grass, like bulk beds where we'll seed like a raised garden bed with grasses and then bulk it up to collect for post-fire recovery or that sort of thing. We don't have any of those at our station, and I don't have a picture of them, so you'll just have to imagine that one. So again, with propagation, so from this stage, the little baby germinates, we'll put it into these yellow pots usually, unless their roots are really long, and then we'll put them into these bullet pots. So Kathy, the nursery management person in Big Bear, she'll talk about this probably pretty extensively tomorrow, about how we do this, but we choose these long pots here because we want their roots to be really long. We don't want these shallow roots to plant out in the field because they're not going to do as well as deep-rooted plants. So this is the final size before we start transplanting. It's a 1 gallon tree pot. It's about that big. It's a little bit over a foot. Digging holes for those is pretty exciting. We either use augers, the mechanical equipment, or we will use post hole diggers. Post hole diggers are good and bad at the same time. If you're in a rocky area, it's really hard to dig a 12-foot deep round hole, but it is what it is. It's what we got to do. So after this, after we get them at this size, we put them outside into our shade house. That way they get hardened off and used to the environment prior to planting. We don't want to transplant them straight from the greenhouse outside because they're not used to the outdoor environment. So we transplant them. This is at these two are at Cactus Flat in the staging area, which you guys will get to see tomorrow. So we plant those 1 gallon pots. We enlist children to help. They seem to like to plant things, which is pretty cool. So we'll transplant those out in the field, and then we'll water them, give them at least like 2 to 3 gallons of water after we plant them. So after all that work, after seed collection, seed storage, propagation, and then planting, that alone is like a 2 to 3 year process. So we have to think of our projects 2 to 3 years out, which is really hard because our funding is so limited and it ebb and flows. We may or may not get funding. So it's kind of like we just grow all sorts of stuff. But we kind of know our priorities, but we don't know if we're going to be able to plant them in time. So there's a little bit of a gray area. So after planting, after 2 to 3 years of propagating the seed, we finally plant it. After that, we have to water the plants for 3 years. So it's a long process. That's why everything I'd say is finished. It's not really finished in my mind ever. So we continue to water the plants for 3 years, and then if they're doing pretty well, we'll just take them off our watering schedule. If they're not, sometimes we'll keep watering them until they look like they're okay. Sometimes we forget about them because they're species that we know are going to be fine, like cactus. We do cactus cuttings, just plant them, we don't even water them. We just come back 2 years later, we're like, sweet, the cactus is growing. So those are pretty cool because we don't have to water them. So some more tried and true methods. We have slashing, which is here on the left. Slashing is used to disguise trails and help capture seed within the slash and everything. That way stuff can grow. It's really important on our forest to do this because everyone wants to go out on all the trails, even though most of them are unauthorized. They look like they're open because there's no signs saying they can or can't do it. There's no barriers, but if there are barriers, they'll just cut them. So we need to do this slashing work, and we usually do this from the beginning of the trail, probably at least a quarter mile in, if not more. We are working on one right now I think it's like a 4 mile road. We're slashing the whole thing. And they're still working on it, one of our crews. We also do mechanical work. This is a bobcat, I think, a bobcat here, and we will use that to dig up the soil to decompact it from those unauthorized groups because those soils after unauthorized traffic has gone through them, they're almost hard as a rock. We have some sites where they're like concrete. We don't know how we're going to do any mechanical work, but we got to figure it out because that project's like coming up. And also what we'll do within these chunked areas and these slashed areas, we'll do seeding. So all the seed we collected, usually the larger amounts, the 50-pound collections that we do with volunteers or whatever, we'll put those out straight out onto the site between the slash and within this mechanical work here. This is chunking, so they dig up the soil and then they dump it out over top. So these are recently finished projects. You guys are going to pass this one tomorrow, but depending on time, we may or may not talk about it out there. So this is in the Cactus Flat area. It was an old shooting area. The forest didn't used to have defined shooting areas, so it was a free-for-all. Everyone just did shooting everywhere. Now that we have designated shooting areas, we have these remnant shooting areas that we need to do something about. So this one had like 2 roll-off dumpsters full of garbage. It also had a whole bunch of shell casings and everything that we picked up with a giant magnet that rolled around. And it was also rare and endangered habitat. So people were shooting into threatened species. That's not okay. This is the carbonate habitat, which you guys will hear about tomorrow. It's pretty cool, pretty neat plants that occur on them. I hope Scott Elias has some pictures of them. They're really cute. So this was planted in 1999. This is before any planting, but after the cleanup. And this is what it looks like now. This is 14 years later. I took this picture last, 2013 sometime. So you can still kind of see that the shooting area is still kind of here, but you can see that all of this is filling in. And since this is like a desert scrub habitat, it's really slow. So we have this one, it's completely recovered, but every time we pass it, I monitor it because I'm always afraid people are gonna be like, oh, look at this shooting area right here, let's put our fridge back there and shoot it. Because that's what people do in the forest. We also have the Snow Valley ski erosion control that we worked on. All the ski resorts have pretty horrendous erosion because there's nothing on them. So I worked on this project 4 years ago, and what we did a lot of seeding and planting. We planted upwards of like 2,000 plants on this site, and it's all right in here, this bottom portion of the ski resort. So this is one of our sites that we seeded. We have this flagging here to deter birds because when you lay seed on the ground, birds want to eat it. So when it would flap in the wind and kind of scare the birds away. This is our YCC crew planting a bunch of plants along the ski resort to help diminish erosion. And this was 2011, right after we planted thousands of grass plugs along the ski resorts, and this is then the following year. They still survived, which is pretty cool. We're always afraid that stuff's gonna die. I don't know, maybe because we're pessimistic, I don't know. I'm always afraid things are gonna die. So that I was pretty excited when I saw that these grasses were still growing. We also do riparian restoration. Riparian restoration is a lot of fun. Riparian systems recover a lot faster than the desert system, so it's more of a rewarding experience if you're there for successional years you get to see. So we will recontour drainage and recontour drainage patterns because after severe erosion with storms and everything, the drainages just get really messed up. This project that I'm going to be talking about, it burned over in 2007, and then there was crazy storms in 2010, and like a whole meadow just like got blown out. We had to restore the whole thing. It was a really fun project. We did a lot of willow cuttings directly into the meadow and the adjacent creek, as well as rose cuttings. Those were exciting because you got really cut up when you were planting them. These are some rose cuttings. So we would use rose and willow cuttings directly into the channel. That was kind of an experiment. We didn't know if it would work. We kind of read some, scientific articles that said, oh yeah, willow cuttings will work directly planted in. So we tried it, and they worked. And we also grew a bunch of willows. We had hundreds and hundreds of willows that we grew for this, and same thing with the roses, which we have right here. We also did these, you can't really see it. We made these like erosion barrier type things with pieces of willow as well as geofence, which is a material that will let water through but won't let sediment through because we wanted the creek to kind of refill back in to restore the meadow that was upstream. So this is like a rock chain of like 35 people going upstream, putting rocks into the drainage to help with. Oh, here's one of the geofences. Sorry, I don't know if you guys can see it that well. I can see it just fine. So we wanted that so that it would create these pools and sediment in this channel to restore the upland or upstream meadow. And this is what the site originally looked like in 2010 after the storms. It looks pretty bad. And this is it in 2013. This was taken in fall, that's why everything looks dead. But it actually is really alive. This meadow, we can barely even get to our monitoring wells in it without getting cut by roses at our neck. So it's filled in a lot. Not only that, since it's in a burn area, we get these downed trees within the meadow, which kind of help with the restoration process too. And it's kind of sketchy to go out there because trees are always falling out there. So we don't take our volunteers in there. So this is where we're going to be going tomorrow. I'll give you a little brief overview now. You can remember these pictures. That way, when you see it tomorrow, you can be like, oh wow, that looks a lot different. So the OHV staging area at Cactus Flat was another erosion control project. This is what it looked like in 2009. It was pretty terrible. And when you see it tomorrow, it looks completely different. We put in this pipe rail fencing so motorcyclists and OHV folks would not drive up these nice trails that they created, which created massive erosion. So we have this here. We planted, I don't know, like 5,000 plants or 6,000. I don't remember. If I remember, I'll get the number for you guys for tomorrow. So that's a cool area. We'll talk more tomorrow about it. This is another finished project. This is the Circle Mountain project, which is kind of near Phelan-ish. It's like near Phelan and the bottom of Highway 138, so it's the lower part of Phelan. It's in Chaparral, which is kind of cool because that's what I'm researching, so I like it. This was this big, we call it the bowl. People were driving up and around, and they were driving up the slope and with their Jeeps and ATVs and motorcycles. It was very compacted. This is one of the sites that I was saying is it was like cement. Not as bad as some of our other ones, but this one was pretty bad. So this one, it took like 4 years to plant it, which is a long time, relatively. And then, of course, the Forest Service, our forest got reorganized and people got shifted around, and then I was in charge of the project, which I had never done in my life, so that was exciting. I got to run a bunch of crews, and we got to restore this area as well as a bunch of other areas. This is what it looked like after mechanical work. So we had a contractor come in and chunk this whole area. We also seeded it with like 200